Under the Harvest Moon by Tim Manning. Mrs. Anderson placed the dish into the cabinet and turned to her son. The look in her eyes spoke louder than her words. My answer is still no. Besides, you know that there is a serial killer on the loose. How could he not? The killer had escaped 2 days earlier from a jail a few towns over, and the local news had been filled with sensationalized accounts of his murders. They had even given him a fancy nickname, something silly like the Hatchet Man or the Thrill Killer. Charlie couldn't remember it, as he hadn't been following the case. He had more important things on his mind. But Mom... No buts, and if you ask again, you're grounded. Charlie grumbled under his breath as he stomped up the stairs to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. He knew that he was too old to cry, yet the tears of frustration welled up behind his eyelids just the same. Reading the note once more, he realized that his opportunity was slipping away. If he didn't leave soon... Then it came to him. He would sneak out. If he were to get caught, any consequence Mother could muster would prove well worth it. Creeping across the cold wood floor, Charlie snatched a sweatshirt from the bed and slipped it over his slender frame. Breath pinched behind pursed lips, he curled his fingers beneath the dry-rotted sash and jerked. With the slight moan of wood against wood, it slid open easily. Below him, the frosty grass shimmered metallic under the harvest moon. In a maneuver perfected by years of practice, Charlie slipped out of the open window and landed softly on the ground. Zipping up to fortify against the chilly night air, he sprinted from the house and into the patchwork of the surrounding fields. Beneath his sneakered feet, the crisp grass crunched and squeaked. A wide smile bisecting his face, Charlie hurdled a sagging strand of barbed wire, paying no heed as one of its rusted spines clipped the hem of his jeans. He didn't care. The lustful stirrings that fluttered in his insides rendered him oblivious. Normally weary of potter's wood, Charlie charged headfirst into the pitch-black tangle of briars and honeysuckle. Hands outstretched before his face, he used the moonlight to navigate through the low-hanging boughs and waist-high brush that tore at his clothes and slapped at his flesh. With a cheer, he exploded onto the well-trodden path that led to his final destination. With the exit to the forest widening before him, he increased his pace. His hormones spurred his acceleration like jet fuel. From the west came the faint sound of thunder. It would rain. It didn't matter, as they would be long done before the first droplets tattooed the chilled earth. Reaching the clearing, Charlie stared down the hill at the scattered remnants of the Stenger farm. Although age and the elements had long since toppled the farmhouse, and the ancient fence posts teetered and crumbled, the hulking barn stood stubborn and defiant. Painted in gray by the opulent moon, it presided over the untended fields and skeletal orchards. Charlie waded through the knee-high grass as he approached the aged building. Grinding to a quick stop, he stooped, hands on his bony knees, as he labored to catch his breath. Before him, the barn's mammoth hanging doors dangled cockeyed, the black breach between them gap-toothed and crooked. A subtle breeze whistled through the timbers, carrying with it the sweet scent of timothy hay with the slightest tinge of mold. Searching his pockets, he produced the slightly crumpled note and held it up to read. The words were so perfectly drawn, so flawlessly rendered, that Charlie found it conceivable that the author had carefully rendered it slowly, letter by perfect letter. The words appeared simple, yet they dripped with innuendo. Meet me at Stenger's barn at 9. Charlie checked his watch. 9 on the dot. Depositing it back into his pocket, he walked toward the doors. With a grunt, Charlie squeezed through the narrow gap and stepped into the cavernous barn. Bluish light trickled through the empty window frames, illuminating the hay-strewn dirt floor and cloaking the empty stalls in thick, ominous shadow. At the far end of the barn, something rustled. His excitement dissolving, Charlie felt the first prickles of fear. "Hello?" he called softly. No reply. Fidgeting nervously, he called out again. "Margaret?" His voice sounded weak and watery. This time, something stirred in the shadows to his right. Startled, Charlie wheeled to face it, and screamed as a body crashed into his, tripping him up and landing hard on top of him. A soft, supple body smelling of jasmine and the heady scent of cinnamon. Eyes bulging, he looked up. Margaret stared down at him, her green eyes sparkling with impending laughter. "Did I scare you, sweetie?" "You," Charlie began. She descended upon him, her soft lips meeting his. The two lovers giggled and cooed as they wrestled in the hay. Breathless, Margaret broke the kiss. "You know, you're lucky I made it here tonight. Was your mother on the warpath again?" "No, I almost didn't get your letter. Putting it in my mailbox was a bad idea." Charlie stiffened. "What do you mean, get my letter? You're the one who wrote me." Withdrawing the paper, he handed it over. Margaret squinted in confusion. "Charlie, that's not my handwriting." Charlie couldn't respond. Rendered mute with fright, he could only stare at the man-sized silhouette that now stood between them and the door. At that moment, the psycho silly moniker came to him. The media had called him the Cupid. Oh God, Charlie, it's him. Despite the fear that threatened to paralyze his limbs, Charlie stood and stepped in between the murderer and Margaret. Stay behind me. I'll try to... Something struck the back of his head, and in a burst of white-hot pain, he crumpled to the floor. Margaret dropped the rotted timber she had bludgeoned him with. I'm so sorry, she whimpered as she scampered to a hole in the back of the barn. Didn't you read the news reports? He stalks lovers, but he only ever kills one. She slipped through the hole and was gone. Unable to turn, Charlie whimpered as the maniac's footsteps drew closer. Outside, a roosting murder of crows cawed in agitation, their night's rest interrupted by tortured screams.